Good morning and welcome to the WellMed Charitable Foundation Caregiver Teleconnection. This morning we have a very important topic and an expert who's going to present to us. This is Kate DeBartolo, who will tell you a little about herself. And she's going to talk about tips for talking about care through the end of life. Very important topic because many of us, I know for myself, my daughter refuses to talk about death. And it's, we all need to do that. So Kate, take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Hopefully you'll get some tips from this too of how you could connect with her, but it is lovely to be with everybody today. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. and just plan on spending a little bit of time talking about some of the introduction to the conversation project and a lot of the free resources we have, as well as tips and tricks we've learned with caregivers about how to start having these conversations. But before jumping into that, I wanted to just share a little bit about why this idea of advanced care planning is important to me. And these are pictures from my wedding, which was now about 10 years ago. And I joke that wedding photography is so expensive. I like to get as much use out of the photos as possible. But it also helps me share a story where you see a picture with my husband on the left-hand side here. And we have had these conversations since we got married, once we had a child, but the very first time we sat down and used the conversation project materials, he had answered every single question as if he were 85 years old with Alzheimer's in a nursing home. I was saying that is all fine and good, but we need to talk about what we would want right now if something unexpected occurred. And his father died very young, unexpectedly playing basketball. And I was like, we need the unexpected conversation. What would you want if something unexpected occurred? I also have a picture with my two sisters up here. The youngest one is 20 years younger than we are and have a big blended family. And I now have 3 step siblings, and with my dad's care, kind of figuring out who's on first. There's a stepmother involved, there's different siblings, and we've been able to have conversations to really try to keep him at the center of discussions that we would have. Similar to the bottom photo, it's a large photo, and that's just my mom's side of the family and not even all of them. But she was one of 7. And when it came to the care for her parents, all 7 siblings were able to be on the same page. My mom was the healthcare decision maker. She's a physician, had a healthcare background, but there was not a lot of infighting amongst siblings. And I realized what a treasure that was for them. And it's something that I'm really drawn to, is not only the experience for the person at the center, but what is this like for caregivers, family, the kind of next layer out. So I would love to get people into the chat if they are willing, just your preferred name, who are the people in your life that you're accountable to or support, just so we can get a sense of either who's calling in, maybe where you're calling in from. Would just love to get a feel for that.
Okay, folks, don't be shy today. Okay.
Thank you, Shane. Living in Texas. Okay, now we got at least 2 Texans on the line, or people living in Texas. Caregiver for your mother. Another one from Iowa. Caregiver for mother. Thank you, Jolene. It's always helpful for me to know kind of who somebody's dealing with here. Legal guardian, care manager, help mom in Texas, Canada. Caregiver for many. I think that's a common thread, Elaine, of whether it's sandwich generation or people who have multiple layers of who they may be caring for in their life, sometimes temporary, sometimes long-term. A care daughter for mama. I like that. Always got mother-in-law. So thank you all for joining and sharing more. Diane, I see your work with Alzheimer's dementia seniors, and hopefully some of these resources will be helpful. So with that, I just want to chat a little bit about the Conversation Project. So we are here trying to help people share their wishes for care through the end of their life. We have no preference for the kind of care somebody may choose. We want to encourage these conversations to happen early and often. We know that a crisis is a really hard time to learn. And so the earlier we can start to normalize these conversations, either around the kitchen table or after watching a favorite TV show, that's what we're trying to encourage, to make it easier. We know a lot of people understand that this is something they should do, but they aren't quite sure how to get started. And so that's where the Conversation Project came to be. We were started about 12 years ago now by Ellen Goodman, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist from the Boston Globe, based on her experience caring for her mother and speaking with many friends and family about their experiences, and realizing that this difference between those who had had conversations and those who hadn't, it wasn't that they're, I don't want to say good death or hard death, because it was still sad or you were grieving the loss of someone, but how complex or complicated that grief was really seemed to make a difference based on whether or not people had had conversations. And in the range of advanced care planning, there's a lot of work of getting medical orders in place or having legal documents in place. And we think all of those are important. But for us, we're particularly focused on talking and having conversations. We know that we can't plan for everything, but we can share what matters most to us with the people who matter most to us. We're not about getting into lots of hypothetical medical scenarios to talk about, but how can we talk about our values so that regardless of what circumstances play out, people would be able to make choices on your behalf. And we can't guarantee that just because somebody has stated they want something that it can definitely happen that way. A little bit like making a birth plan where you're invited to think through what would success look like to you and giving birth, but sometimes medically things may be different, but that we can really create this foundation of a plan that would hopefully be in line with what your wishes are when the time comes. And when we talk about conversations, we know that listening is a really important part of that. And especially for many of us on the line who may be caregivers, there can often be an urge to talk at people or pepper somebody with questions, and really trying to listen to what somebody is saying. I love this quote, that it's often through the quality of our listening and not the wisdom of our words that we can have this change on people. And that many times silence is a very valid form of participation. Somebody who's really just not able to go there yet, we don't have to push ourselves on them. And we have additional resources and blog articles for what do you do if somebody really doesn't want to have the conversation, and we can get into that more. But I just want to mention, I'm going to be giving you tips on how to talk about this, but really want to encourage people to focus also on how you would listen. And in this work, I love this quote by Dr. Atul Gawande, who's the author of internationally best-selling book, Being Mortal, that our ultimate goal, after all, is not a good death, but a good life to the very end. And that is really what we see here. Rather than this being conversations about how somebody wants to die, this is about how do you want to live your life in whatever time is left. How do you want to live your life, and how can we understand that so we can honor and respect what those wishes are? So the Conversation Project, we are a public engagement initiative. We're philanthropically supported. We're an initiative of IHI, or the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And we have a website, theconversationproject.org, where people can go and get a lot of different free resources. I mentioned the blog posts that we have. There's lots of people sharing their stories there. And then we have a lot of tools for how people can bring this to their community, which I'll share a little bit more about. But we have, when we first got started, we said, we think we need to help normalize these conversations. We're going to try to reach out through traditional media, maybe social media, and make a website available with a tool, a conversation starter guide. And I'm going to share a little bit more of the conversation starter guide with you. But very quickly, we started to hear from individuals in the field saying, could you help me figure out how to choose a healthcare proxy? Or somebody asked me to be their healthcare proxy and I don't really understand that. Or how do I talk to a healthcare team? Or what do I do if I'm a caregiver of somebody with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, or a child with a serious illness? So each of these guides was created based on feedback from the field. And we would love to hear if there's something that you think is missing. All of these are available in English, Spanish, and Chinese, and they have a Creative Commons license on them. So you can take them, you can adapt them. There are PDFs on our website that you are welcome to use. Some groups are adding additional language translations, for example. And then we also worked with Ariadne Labs very quickly in April 2020, put together a guide. It's kind of a 2-pager specifically for somebody if they were to get COVID-19. What would you want somebody to know? Because that felt like a really different set of circumstances, especially early on. And then we've created a What Matters to Me workbook, which is a really great tool for anybody living with a serious illness to think through what matters most to them. And it never mentions end-of-life care. It never mentions death. And I think for any of you where you feel like you might be having a hard time introducing the concept to somebody, this workbook could be a really helpful tool. And it still gets to a lot of similar concepts. On our website, we've got, as I mentioned, stories that people have shared. We've just written a couple about that idea of what do you do if somebody doesn't want to talk, or if somebody doesn't want to listen to what you're saying, tips for solo agers. There's this one by Dr. Ira Byock around Father's Day about why he has done this because he's a father. And there are some that are irreverent, like, please trim my chin and upper lip hairs. Like, this is what I really need my people to know. I want to pause for a moment because I'm seeing there's a closed caption question popped up. And I don't know if that is something Evelyn or Minerva you're able to help with. Closed captioning. I do not.
Minerva, you know how to do that?
I will keep going, and thank you for asking, Anne, and hopefully then hosts may be able to find how to add that.
I'm sorry, I don't know how.
May not have it set up properly or on this one. I'll try to speak more slowly. So as I mentioned, we thought, let's go out, share the word of this, try to get awareness of the concept, build tools, and very quickly different community groups started to say, can I bring this to Boulder, Colorado? Can I bring this to Barrington, Illinois? And I've just done a quick screenshot from a WebEx call that we had of community leaders all over the country who were signing on to learn more about how they could bring this to their region. We know that this concept and content can be introduced by so many different types of leaders, and we want it to be that way. I mentioned the Creative Commons license. Everything we have is meant to be adapted by people in the public. And we might have everything from, well, we're trying to reach people where they live, work, pray, and learn. And it could be a retired ICU nurse who says, I saw this in my professional life, and now in my encore career, I want to help introduce this concept, to state organizations or clergy who are introducing this through more formal means. So you can just see the types of things we've done. A lot of large employers, really large employers who are doing brown bag lunches, realizing many of our employees are caregivers when they go home, and we can help them feel prepared for these conversations. It can help with presenteeism, absenteeism, helping people feel like we recognize this other part of their life. A lot of great work with different denominations around how faith leaders can introduce this topic, particularly with a denominational lens that might match their faith, and a lot of educational settings, some for retirees, some for current high school students, college students, health professions students. So it's been really exciting to see people take the resources and adapt them to their setting. We know that some people are much more likely to respond to this if they hear their clergy person preaching on the importance of this one weekend. That's going to feel more acceptable than a lawyer or a doctor trying to bring it up. So we want to reach people however they are best going to receive this message, and hope that if you find it to be useful for your care setting or your community, that you'll help do the same. So that's a little bit about the conversation project, but I wanted to start with almost taking off your caregiver hat here. I'm going to walk you through some of the conversation questions that we offer. And inside that PDF or that guide, you'll see open-ended questions like thinking about, what matters most to me through the end of my life is fill in the blanks. What would be your what matters to me statement? And you can either choose to share them in the chat or to just think about what your answers are, but I'll share with you a couple of examples that we've received from people that go everything from, in the hospital with excellent nursing care, peaceful, pain-free, nothing left unsaid. I loved a woman who just said, I really hate having the sheets tucked around my feet in bed. And I really need somebody to know that if I can't speak for myself, please do not tuck the sheets in thinking that you're making me cozy, because that's going to be so uncomfortable for me. So wide range of answers that folks might have. But you can see here, the larger the phrase, the more regularly the concept came up for people. And so you can see peaceful, comfortable, with family and friends, natural, painless, and that very few of these are medical terms. what people are thinking about is not just the medical scenarios, but really how they want to feel and what matters most to them. And so you'll hear me say that a lot, that we're trying to shift people from thinking about what's the matter with me to what matters to me and how can I articulate that. So we ask some open-ended questions, and then we get into a few scale questions. We know that some people still would find it hard to say, I don't know what I'm supposed to talk about. But if you offer this example of, what are your concerns about medical treatment? Are you concerned that you won't get enough care or that you'll receive too much care? People can often try to figure out where they fall along that spectrum, and that can be the place to go in a conversation. I have a friend whose parents are on the exact opposite ends of this spectrum, and it's really helpful for her to talk to them about it and figure that out. And so maybe somebody's kind of over towards the right, and that gives you an opening to say, okay, tell me about this. What is it that you're concerned about with receiving too much care? Or what's an example of somebody we've seen in our life? I remember what happened with Aunt Susie, and it made me think, how do you feel about that? So giving some prompts for people to react to. And then trying to get more specific of who are you going to talk to? Where would you feel comfortable doing that? What are you going to start the conversation? We know that it always seems too soon until it's too late, and really trying to help people make plans for when they're going to have the conversation. And we think that this, I mentioned early and often, but what I mean by that is this idea of when somebody turns 18 or 21, and they might be moving out of the house or moving to a new state or going to college. It's a really important time to designate a healthcare proxy. A parent is not automatically given access to records after age 18. And so while some states may follow a protocol, if there's not a proxy in place, it can be really important for people when they're coming of age to have identified who they would want. I remember a young woman saying, I did this and I chose my mom, but I now realize, I'm 25, I'm really healthy. If something happens, it's going to be a very unexpected thing, and my mom is going to be devastated. And I actually don't want her to be in that position. I'm going to ask my cousin to do it so my mom can just be by my side and not have all those questions. So you can really think about how or why somebody might be a proxy, or who you'd want to have the conversation with. And I should have mentioned, I'll get into a little bit more, but a proxy is the person you identify in case you are not able to speak for yourself in a particular moment. Who would you identify to make healthcare decisions on your behalf? If somebody is able to answer their own questions, you still get to be in charge, but maybe somebody's going to have a medical procedure, or they have a condition where they're not able to communicate as well. That's when we really want to identify a person who would help make those decisions. And I'll share more examples of that later. We want these conversations, again, to happen often, some sense of pacing. Maybe it's every decade, or we have every April 16th each year, National Healthcare Decisions Day. Benjamin Franklin had a quote that nothing is certain in life but death and taxes. So after you do your taxes on the 15th, on the 16th, it's a chance to revisit your advanced care planning, make sure your proxy's up to date. If you want to update anything, it's a good reminder of an annual time to revisit. Maybe there's different life events. I mentioned having this conversation when I got married. And then again, when we had a child. I know in a lot of blended families, perhaps a divorce is an important time to recognize, oh, I might need to update who my decision maker is here. Or after the death of somebody, maybe that has helped you realize there's something you would want that's different. Or maybe the person who was your proxy is now the one who has died, and you need to revisit who you would choose. But some of these big life events can be a good reminder. Big trips can be a good one. My dad did a month-long cross-country motorcycle trip a few years ago. And so we had conversations about what he wanted more in a medical scenario, but then we updated it of, okay, if there was a motorcycle accident, that's a little bit different. What would you want us to know? And his wishes were a little bit different. Or if somebody's doing an international trip or a mission trip, like these could be times to make sure that we have a plan in place. And then especially when somebody's diagnosed with a new serious illness, in some countries, it is the norm immediately upon a cancer diagnosis, we're going to do all of this advanced care planning now, while you're still feeling well, before we get into all sorts of treatments, so that you can do this earlier. And I think that That's a lovely concept of not putting something off. Oh, we've got time. I don't want to, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but let's just start to have these conversations earlier. Anne is asking, that is a proxy different from a power of attorney? One thing I want to be careful of, especially knowing we've got people on from a variety of countries and in Canada, is there can be slightly different language per state. Some states refer to a healthcare proxy as a healthcare agent or a healthcare surrogate. In this case, we're only discussing somebody who has permission to make healthcare choices, not some of the other things that a power of attorney might be able to make in terms of financial decisions or legal decisions. So today, when we're referencing, is a healthcare proxy. But in your state, this is one of the confusions within the US, is that some states may refer to it as a power of attorney. So that's all fine and good. We get people realizing, yes, I should talk about this. I know what I want to say, or I know what my wishes are, my values are, and I still have no idea how to bring this up. I don't know what the opening sentence is to introduce this to my parent or to my child or to my spouse. And so we've tried to include some icebreaker questions. You know, I was thinking about what happened to fill in the blank. It made me realize that I wasn't sure what you might want in that situation. Or even though I'm okay right now, I'm worried that fill in the blanks of whatever you're worried about, and I want to be prepared. Can we talk about some of the things that matter to me? It's, again, I think this framing of, I want to talk about how you want to live your life through the end, as opposed to let's talk about how you want to die, I think can make a really big difference for people. Framing this, especially if you're the caregiver, around honor and respect, and I want to do right by you, and you know, maybe you've helped care for me your whole life, and I want to be sure that I can do the same for you. There are a lot of great TV shows and movies lately that have been doing a better job of conveying this scenario, and so sometimes people will reference that. And you all have one of the best excuses of all, joining today, that you attended this session, or I heard about the Conversation Project, and it made me realize we hadn't talked about some things. I'd love to talk to you about it. And as I mentioned, we have a guide for how to choose a healthcare proxy and think through that as well. But today I want to talk a little bit more about the conversations and some of the tips that we've heard from the field. So one of them is to really think about, especially if you're trying to choose somebody or you're trying to talk about your own wishes for care, is the role that you want to play, regardless of what that role is, making sure it's known. So there was a woman, I was doing a session like this in Las Vegas, and she was looking through our guide and she was looking at those questions and she was like, I really don't care about any of this. I don't have a strong opinion. I just want my son and daughter to do what makes them feel comfortable when the time comes. But she had not told them that. And so that is the conversation she needs to have with them, is so that they're not second guessing, saying, I don't know, mom never told us. We have no idea what she would have wanted. The conversation is, I want you guys to choose what makes you feel best when the time comes. That there's a juxtaposition there. I've got a little bit from an article that the author Katie Butler wrote on our blog, based on her personal experience with her parents, and particularly around dementia or Alzheimer's diagnosis. And she has written out a very detailed letter of, you know, dear medical advocate, if you're reading this, it's because I have, you know, dementia, and this is exactly what I want you to do. And I want you to follow every single one of these steps to the letter. And she cared a lot about the role that she played in that. She really wanted to have a voice in her own decisions. So there's no right or wrong end of that spectrum, but thinking about the role you want to play and making sure other people know that. The next is to really think about the type of care that you want to receive. So answering with that current state, body and mind. For example, when my husband and I did it, and he answered for a hypothetical scenario 50 plus years in the future. If people sometimes say, well, I don't know if I'm going to get a cancer diagnosis, or am I going to be hit by a bus, or here's what happened in my family. And I would say that's all the more reason to have these conversations, is because we can't think of every hypothetical scenario that might play out, but we can talk about right now, here's what I would want you to know about what matters to me. And we can talk about it again. This isn't a one-time conversation. It's really important, if you hear from somebody about the idea of being at home, to know that that is not always feasible and to try to unpack and understand what that means. I have heard remember being at an event where a woman was in tears just saying, my grandmother's only wish was to be at home. And her Alzheimer's got so advanced that we couldn't do it. Medically, it was too difficult. And I feel like we didn't honor the one thing she asked of us. Or a family in New York City who said, we're in a 5th floor walk-up. It is not physically feasible to be at home. Or for some people, it might not be financially feasible. And to find out, what does home mean to somebody? So for my grandmother, it was that she had her cat with her. As long as Pele the cat could be with her, she was willing to go anywhere. For other people, it might be having a private room, or ability to put up your own artwork, or having home cooked meals every now and then, or being physically near where other family is so that they can have visits. So understanding what is home to someone can be really helpful. And to just be careful anytime you hear somebody say, if I ever get like that, pull the plug, or I want the whole enchilada. They're generally trying to tell you something. They probably fall along that spectrum of, I'm worried about too much care or too little care. So to try to learn a little bit more about that, I hope that we never hear the term, there's nothing more we can do for you, Mrs. Jones, because there should always be something that can be offered to people. It may not always be curative treatment solutions, but we can be providing a lot of comfort care. And so this idea of, okay, it sounds like if you're worried about, I want the whole enchilada, that you want aggressive treatment and curative solutions, you want to try everything that's out there, versus you want aggressive comfort care. We're not going to be abandoning you, and there's often not a plug to pull, just to be clear with people. I remember a husband and wife who were at a table with me, and he said, oh, both of my parents had dementia. My family knows, if it ever gets like that for me, we're going to have a big party at the beach. And at the very end of the party, I'm going to swim to China. And if I don't make it, oh, well. And he's laughing and he's like, yeah, we've talked all about it. And his wife was rolling her eyes, just saying, all he ever talks about is this party at the beach, but he won't actually talk about what his wishes really are. And it gave them some language to say, okay, it sounds like you would want comfort care. You don't want a lot of curative solutions taken. And so it was a place for them to start. So just keeping an ear out for some of those euphemisms that people may use. And to just think about the role that you want others to play. Asking if somebody can and will honor what your wishes are. There was a woman we worked with in Hawaii who knew that this was important. She was in good health, but she asked her husband to be her proxy. She was trying to share what mattered to her. And he said, I can't do it. I can't honor what you asked for. I will sit by your side for 20 years in a vegetative state, and I cannot make any of these choices. Please don't make me do it. She went to her oldest daughter, who just cried nonstop and couldn't handle the conversation. She went to her son, who said, I got it, Mom. You don't want any intervention. I'll never let anybody hook you up to a machine. You're ready to go. And she was like, no, I didn't say that either. And she went to her youngest child, who really listened to what she had to say and said, okay, I get that depending on your prognosis, you'd be willing to try certain interventions, but if it's not showing much progress, you wouldn't want much more. And so she had not originally expected that her youngest child would be the one to do it, youngest adult child, I should say. But that's who she chose to be her proxy, because that's somebody who could do it and was willing to honor her wishes and not just do what they would want in that situation. We've seen a lot of there's a growing population of solo agers, adults who do not have spouse, adult children, or siblings, maybe that they're in contact with, or they just don't have that kind of nuclear family to lean on. And so we have seen different congregations start to pair people together to identify. Somebody says, okay, well, you don't have a proxy and you don't have a proxy. Could you two sit down and talk with each other and be willing to play that role for each other? And recognizing it doesn't always have to be family. Being sure to tell more than one person. There was a woman at an event who said, I'm my husband's healthcare proxy. We have had these conversations. I know what he wants. We've done all of the legal documentation, but I realize I'm his second wife and he has not told his adult children that I'm the proxy. And that's going to be World War III. If something unexpected happens and they think they're in charge, and I realize now he can just tell them, hey guys, wanted you to know Barbara and I have been in touch about this. She's the proxy. Let me know if you want to talk. You don't always have to talk with everyone, but we're trying to prevent what we call that seagull syndrome of somebody who comes in from out of town, swoops in, dumps all over the entire plan, and swoops back out when there was a good plan in place. When I think of that example of my mom being one of 7 children, she had a more in-depth conversation and understanding of what my grandparents wanted. But the grandparents also spoke to the other kids and said, Margie's in charge. If you have questions, go to her. They didn't have to have this full conversation, but it was still really helpful. And just being careful. Oh, I see in the question from Catherine, the PowerPoint, I'm happy to have that be available for anybody afterwards. So I'll make sure to follow up with that. There was a woman in Florida who got up at an event with over 200 people, and she was in tears, and she just said, I realize now, after we've gone through this, I owe my father a tremendous apology because he's really sick right now and it got bad last night and he wouldn't go to the hospital. And my siblings and I laid it on so thick. We were calling him, texting him, showed up at the house, telling him how he has to go to the hospital, how we need him in our lives, how his grandchildren need him in their lives. And I'm realizing he's trying to tell us something and we are not listening to what he is trying to convey about what he's willing to go through right now. And so she was like, I've already texted them and we're going to have a family meeting tonight, but really being careful about pushing what somebody else might want in this situation or might want for you. And we see that a lot with cases of dementia or in pediatric cases of somebody who may not be able to speak, but how do we keep this person at the center? Mom may not be able to speak for herself right now, but what would she want here rather than what we would want? And so many times providers really want to know that. Somebody will say, well, what would you do if this was your mom, doctor? It's like, what does your mother like to do? What is a successful day for your mother? What are those values? That's again where it comes back to. And then inviting other people, if you're sharing your wishes, invite them to share their wishes with you. And to think about how they really want to receive this message. Different people are going to want to receive it different ways. I remember a woman in Akron, Ohio, who said that she made dessert for her family every Thanksgiving. And she said she held all the desserts hostage and said, no pumpkin pie till you tell me how you want to die, and made everybody go around the table and share their wishes. And that worked for her family and that dynamic. And for other people, that would not work at all. Some people are not willing to talk about this in a large group setting. They don't even really want to talk about it very much. But this woman referred to her husband as Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh when it came to this topic. He was just kind of moping around, didn't want to talk about it. But she felt really nervous of not knowing who he would want as the proxy, what his wishes would be. So she phrased questions. She went through the materials herself, thought about what he would want, and framed them as yes/no questions back to him. I know you don't want to talk about this much, but is it correct to assume you would want me to be your healthcare proxy? Yes. Okay, that answered one big question for her. And if you couldn't speak for yourself, these are the things, this is how I think you would want me to make decisions. Is that right? He's like, yeah, but here's one that I would change. And he was more able to go to it from that angle rather than, please, let's sit down and have you pour your heart out to me about all of these possible conversations. So thinking about the style for how somebody would want to receive it can be really helpful. And just recognizing that we know that people often feel a lot of relief after having these conversations. It's like over 90% of Americans agree this is important to do, and they're just nervous about how to bring it up. But while some aspects of it can be sad, they can also be funny and loving, and they don't always end up being super serious, remembering stories from the past, that emphasis on how I can care for you. I think we've heard so many stories about how it has really strengthened relationships. And so 2 pieces of messaging that we know really work well across all different kinds of people, whether they are open to having these conversations or they're nervous or anxious about them, is this idea that conversations clarify. You may think I know what you want, but I just want to clarify to be sure that I'm on the right page. And that these conversations can give us a sense of control when a lot of other things may feel out of control. If we're in the situation where we're having to answer questions, here's a chance to have some conditional control over a time that may feel out of our out of our hands. And that this is a chance to have a say in our care. You can demand shared decision-making. You have made so many other major life choices. Why leave this one up to other people to decide on your behalf? And again, this idea that clinicians really appreciate knowing what matters to people. It's not being rude to a doctor to say what you want, because they can make better recommendations. Is what matters most to you. I've got a family wedding I really would love to be at. My grandson's getting married in 2 months, and I really want to do whatever I can to be there. That really gives clinicians a chance to make a plan and medically provide, like, how are we going to get there? And that people's wishes can change over time. I just really want to hit that home. I remember a gentleman in the Boston area who was in his late 90s. He had a variety of health conditions, and he had a great plan with his doctor where he did not want additional medical intervention taken. He did not want to be in intensive care. And yet he was admitted to the hospital in the ICU with a full code status. And the doctor came by rounding and was just like, "What's going on, Mr. Brown? I thought we had a plan." And he said, "We do, but my first great grandchild is due in 2 weeks. And I will do anything I can to be here to meet that baby. And then we can go back to the original plan." And to me, that's a perfect example of, this is not a one-time thing. This is focusing on what your values are, what you want, so that the medical system can help respond to that. It's only in the last few decades where medicine and technology have gotten so advanced that we have a say. We didn't used to have as many options around this, and it's unique to some of, like, the higher resourced and advanced medical countries where we can even have these conversations and think about what we would want. But the messaging that works, whether it's from a clinician or from a family member, it's just this idea that we'll figure this out together. We're not leaving you alone to try to deal with this time by yourself. We'll figure it out together. There doesn't have to be one right answer. We can talk about it more over time, and just kind of showing that you are there and open to it. And with this idea of conversations clarifying this, I'm just included a screen grab of an email that we received from someone just talking about elderly grandparents who live alone, nobody to care for them. And this grandchild has been trying to suggest assisted living or having an aide, and they wouldn't choose a healthcare proxy. But she looked through the conversation project materials on a flight out there and started asking questions rather than just telling them how worried she was. And from that, they ended up, not only are they willing to have me be their proxy, they've agreed to move. We were able to talk about really what mattered most to them. And I think that that is such a important thing to keep in mind, especially as caregivers, where we do have concerns and here's what I'm worried about for you, or here's what I want to see for you, but really trying to frame things back as questions where somebody else is able to offer their own wishes. So I want to make sure we have time for questions and answers. But my hope now is from this, that you would look at the conversation starter guide yourself, maybe make sure you've chosen your person. It's so important, especially for caregivers, to make sure they have a proxy and there's a plan in place in case something were to happen to you, and to start that conversation. I've been talking a lot about the conversation piece, and some of that is because we don't want somebody to say, "Oh yeah, I did that." I'll share the example of my mother-in-law, who, when she knew what I was doing, said, "Oh yeah, I filled out one of those forms 13 years ago when I had shoulder surgery. I bet my doctor still has it on file." And I was like, "Oh, I bet your doctor doesn't still have it on file. None of us have talked about what those wishes would be." And it doesn't do us much good if somebody's just filled out a legal document and it is in a manila folder in some filing cabinet that nobody is aware of. Or my favorite, somebody who's like, "I did it and we put it in the safety deposit box at the bank." But nobody knew who the proxy was or how to get that information. And so I do think it's very important to document the wishes, and there's forms that you can get from your state attorney general's office. It's free to do. It doesn't always have to be with an attorney, but that it's really important to talk about what you've chosen or to explain what your answers are, so that the person who's making your decisions can understand what you put in writing. And to just think about how you might bring this "what matters to me" concept back to either your professional organization, for those of you in that role, or to your your personal sphere of influence. We know that people are much more motivated by this when they know other people in their life who have done it and can talk about what a difference it has made for them. So thinking about who in your personal life you might be able to talk to, and that you could even send somebody a text right now. You know, I'm in this session. I would love to talk to you about this later this week because it's fresh in my mind. And for you not to wait, we always say, what can you do by next Tuesday? And not to have this be something really far off. You may choose to say, well, the whole family is going to be getting together next month for something in the summer. I'll wait to bring it up then. But for many people, it can still be helpful to know that the conversation is coming, or to say, I'd like to talk to you about this. I'm going to send you some materials ahead of time. Again, really thinking about how they might best receive it. I want to share this letter. I'll read it out loud as well. But when we first started the conversation project and we were talking about the concept, we had a physician in the room, Dr. Karen Boudreau, who took out a piece of notebook paper and just started writing. So you can see her handwriting, scratching out words, and it almost reads as a poem, but it's a letter to her daughters where she says, if you're faced with a decision you're not ready for, it's okay. I'll try to let you know what I would want for various circumstances. But if you come to something we haven't anticipated, it's okay. And if you come to a decision point and what you decide results in my death, it's okay. You don't need to worry that you've caused my death. You haven't. I will die because of my illness or my body failing or whatever. You don't need to feel responsible. Forgiveness is not required. But if you feel bad, responsible, guilty, first of all, don't. And second of all, you are loved and forgiven. If you're faced with a snap decision, don't panic. Choose comfort, choose home, choose less intervention, choose to be together at my side, holding my hand, singing, laughing, loving, celebrating, and carrying on. I will keep loving you and watching you and being proud of you. And I can only read it without crying because I've read it many times now, but it is such a beautiful sentiment in the first place. It's an amazing thing for her daughters to have this in her handwriting and in her voice and message. And this idea of, if I die, it's not because of a choice you made, it's because my body failed. You know, it's that idea of, it's not giving up, it's letting go. And how lovely it is for her daughters to have this in her writing. And for some people, the conversation is easier to start in writing. They may have somebody who says, I can't talk about this, it's too hard. It's like, okay, I'm going to send you an email, or I'll put my thoughts in writing for you, because that may be easier. At the very least, you can pull it up. If you have to make a decision, I want to be sure you know what would have mattered to me. And many people have now even taken this letter, and I'll make sure to include it in the slides, or we've got a picture of it as well. So thinking about the way that you would want to communicate with your people and how they might want to most receive it. So if you want to get involved with the conversation project, I've just included some information. We've got a map of where different community champions are, got a Facebook group for different community champions, as well as some social media channels where we continue to try to share tips and tricks that we've learned along the way. And maybe that's a helpful way to stay involved. And I've included my email address here, kdebartolo@ihi.org, in case anybody wants to be in touch. But I just wanted to be sure that we have some time for questions and see what kinds of topics have come up for everyone else.
Now, Kate, on the website, all these guides are available?
Yes,
Okay.
I will. I think maybe I'll stop sharing so that we can kind of see each other, and then I'll put a link to the website in the chat for people.
Well, we can send it out with our post-session questionnaire too.
Great. I would love to hear if there's questions or examples or things that have come up for those on the line who may have thoughts about the way you want to bring this up. One thing that I wanted to mention is we try to shy away from the phrase loved one in our materials as much as possible, because we recognize that there are sometimes where people are like not every family or every caregiving scenario is a really hunky-dory family of everybody getting along really well, and that sometimes we have to play that role of being a caregiver, and it doesn't always feel like it's a loved one, or we're still trying to do well by somebody, but the relationships can be strained. And so hopefully some of the resources we have are helpful with that as well. That's some of the real life examples were helpful.
Okay, people are liking your presentation, probably no more than I did, because as I told you, I have a daughter who doesn't talk about death. And so now we don't talk about death.
Yeah. Well, maybe that idea, like you want to talk about how you want to live. Yeah, it's more. And I think that's a really important thing. I remember doing an interview with someone who's saying, oh, well, with cancer, somebody can be dying for 2 years. It's like, well, I would argue that they are living during those 2 years of receiving treatment, and that it is not just the, you know, if you guys are familiar with the online satirical magazine, The Onion, who will make satirical headlines, and they said, new study shows death rate holds steady at 100% or something. You know, this is the one thing that is universal for all of us. And yet I think that emphasis on how you want to live your life with whatever time is left can be an easier thing for folks to grasp, rather than how somebody wants to die. That could be an easier, well, let's wait, we're not there yet, we'll get to it later.
Great. Okay, folks, come on. This is your opportunity.
Yes,
if you're on the
Stephanie.
phone, please press *6. I have this little website and I can see that you've done that. Or if you're on Zoom, just put your hand up or go ahead and unmute and tell us what you're thinking.
Yeah, this is Stephanie, and I'm going to visit with my mom this weekend, and I see her about once a month, but she's 86, very independent, and she wants to be cremated. So she's contacted like 3 different cremation societies and or funeral homes and stuff. And so she says to me, well, this weekend, I want you to go through with me and help me decide which one I should pick. So, you know, she's being proactive in what she wants. And yeah, so this was helpful.
Yeah, maybe you could also be sure. There's some people who can almost talk about like funeral plans or the songs they want or cremation more than they can talk about the medical part ahead of that. Or if that's
true.
like, okay, this is so great, we're talking about these. Can you help me understand, if I have to make decisions for you, how you want to think about that beforehand can be helpful. And for some people, this
Right.
becomes a stepping stone to conversations about finances or family relationships. So like it can be an entry into other areas.
Right. And she's the one who I believe has her advance directives in a doctor's office somewhere. But yes, has she communicated it with us? Not really. Yeah. So good. This will help me for this weekend. Thank you.
That's great. Robert, what would you like to say to us? Robert Day?
Kim Elliott?
Hi, Kate. I just kind of wanted to, this presentation is really going to be helpful for me with bringing in the rest of the family. My mom and I are kind of on the same page, and I know what she wants, and we've done everything for that. But the focus now on how she wants to live, I think is going to be really helpful with bringing in the rest of the family. And I really like that. How do you know, what's most important to her?
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that that's going to be important because we're in palliative care now, and we're probably, really getting close to hospice care. And so this was just really helpful for us in bringing in the rest of the family. And I think that that's something that a lot of people that this may help a lot of people with that aspect, because Mom and I are on the same page and we're fine. But it's my son and my brother that will know she's got a long time to live. We're not talking about this. And so I just want to thank you for the presentation and for that information, because that's going to be real helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I think that idea of helping bring other people along can make your experience better too, Kim. That's what I'm really drawn to in this work, is how to help make sure that those relationships afterwards are still strong and intact. And we know that depression rates for survivors are a lot lower 6 months after the loss of someone if they've had these conversations. That there's not that second guessing of, I don't know if mom would have wanted that, or did I make the right choice, that may, or my sibling and I aren't speaking to each other. And so that can make a really big difference. I also wanted to just name, with that sibling dynamic, I remember a brother-sister duo, and the mom had wanted them to make, she was being very proactive. This is what I want. I need you guys to do it. And the son was just like, Mom, I can't make these choices for you. Like, this is too hard. Please don't make me do this. I can't make these choices. And she said, oh no, these are my choices. I just need you to be my voice if I can't speak for myself. So if I'm able to speak for myself, these are the choices I will be making. But I like that idea of, you're also helping make it feel kind of like Dr. Boudreau's letter, that you're not choosing something that might result in my death. You're just being my voice because this is what I chose. I think that can be really helpful.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, I've got a little bit of housekeeping, and I think we'll have time for another question or two after I do my housekeeping, if that's all right with you. Kate?
Yep, I see one raised hand, but we can do it.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, I missed it.
From Emily.
Hi, I just put my hand up, so you didn't miss anything. I just want to thank you for this. I had joined. My sister sent me the link to the web series because we're going through dealing with my parents. My dad's like, they just moved to senior living, and my dad's like starting to show signs of dementia, or we're starting to recognize them, I should say. So I was thinking about my parents when I got on this conversation, and then I realized that I'm having lunch with like my mother-in-law on Friday, and she's great, but she's a tough old bird. So this is really going to help my husband and I think, start the conversation with her as well. And then I loved, Kate, how you talked about how you had the conversation with your husband. Because on Sunday when I was out, I texted my husband, please grab something out of the freezer for dinner. And he texted back, he's like, I'm not going to be here for dinner. I'm going to be in Oklahoma. He's a lineman, so he left on storm. And so by the time I got home around 7, he was already on a flight there. And I realized, jokingly, we've talked about things like this, but we haven't sat down and had that conversation. So that was really good that, it's not just for our aging parents or someone that we're taking care of. It's for anyone who we love. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And a couple of things come to mind with your mother-in-law. You can often even reference, like, if you and your husband are going to do this, like, this is something we're doing, and we want to be sure to ask you. It's not that we just think that you're old or infirm and that's why we're bringing it up. Like, this is just something we're all doing. And with your father, hopefully the dementia guide is particularly helpful, because it talks about what you could do at early stages, or what to know about the concept of denial, and if it is or isn't applicable into your situation. But with the younger adult example, one example I want to share is of a colleague who was having this conversation with her husband. And this idea of talking early is almost like we can stretch our muscles or build our muscles before a crisis. So it's not the first time we practice talking about it. If a crisis comes out, we're more comfortable with it. And she and her husband had the conversation, and her what matters statement came down to one sentence, basically, of, if I can intellectually and socially parent our children, I'm in. That's it. They've got 2 almost high schoolers. And she was like, because something unexpected would have occurred at this point. But if I might have a lot of physical limitations, but I can still understand what's going on in their day. I can talk to them about friendship issues they're having. I can hear about their homework and participate. I want you to do everything you can to save my life. But if the prognosis is such that I'm not going to be able to participate in their life that way, I don't need you to take extreme measures to try to save my life. But that one sentence of, if I can intellectually and socially parent our children, I'm in. That's all. Like, her husband now has the reference point of what matters to her to make almost any decision that could come up. Atul Gawande talks in his book of somebody whose father was heading into surgery that had the potential to cause paralysis or have other, stroke issues. And he just said, if I can watch college football and eat chocolate ice cream, do what you got to do. And the surgeons did come out partway through saying, your dad's going to be paralyzed. Here's the situation. Just like, can you watch football and eat chocolate ice cream? And they said, yes, get back in there, do what you can do. And he lived another 10 years. He wrote a book. Like, that is what we mean by trying to figure out what matters to someone. And that may shift over time. It might be at first, like, I want to be able to go to church every weekend. Or does it become like, I want to be able to watch the services online, or I want to be able to receive a visitor from pastoral care? People's what matters statement can change, but it should really be about your values of what's going on in your own life.
Beautiful. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Kate. I need to let people know, especially Emily, that if you are not signed up, if you just got the link from someone or the telephone number from someone, please register, because when you register, you will get the resources, you'll get this beautiful slide presentation and the information associated with it. And you can register by calling the WellMed Charitable Foundation customer service person, the wonderful Minerva, at 866-390-6491. And I will put that, the person who gave Emily the contact, I don't see Emily is still here. Would you please let her know to call that number, 866-390-6491, so that she gets the resources and the PowerPoint, and the monthly calendar will come monthly in addition. Now, I want to remind you that we have the podcasts. You're going to get a post-session questionnaire that will contain, it'll have in it all of these resources. And we hope that you will take advantage of the podcasts that we have on www.caregiverteleconnection.org. There are many, wide variety of topics, all by expert presenters. So we hope you'll take advantage of that. And with that, I'm sure it's just about the top of the hour. Kate, do you have anything else you'd like to say to us?
No, I'm just grateful for everybody making the time to be here today, and hope you'll stay in touch if you have questions, and you'll help continue to normalize this in your neck of the world.
Thank you so much. You've done a beautiful job. Really appreciate your time and energy and preparation. I want to thank all the caregivers who are online today, who particularly those who participated, because it really means a lot to us. And I want to also thank the WellMed Charitable Foundation, because what they have done is to put together, resources like this so that the caregivers have an education, so that they have a chance to share with each other, so that it doesn't matter if you're totally isolated, out in a rural area, that you can get online here, or you can use your phone and really be a part of a group, of a community. So with that, I am going to stop the recording, and thank you all for what you do, and have a great day.
Thank you all.